I'll call the meeting to order at 6:40. We have approval of minutes from November 30th.
I move approval of minutes, November 30th.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion. All those in favor of the minutes of November 30th as written, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions?
I abstain.
I abstain.
Oh, I abstain too.
Yes, Emily, and
Are we supposed to say why?
And I don't think, yeah, I think
I asked actually, have Barb check that, she checked, and she said that it's a good idea. They couldn't come up with it. Yeah, they said there was no official, they couldn't get a legal ruling, yes or no, but it would be a good idea, so.
I wasn't sure.
right.
That's a good idea.
Yep. So not present. Thank you, and thank you to Kim Price for doing our minutes. It is I shouldn't say thankless, because we're thanking you, but it is a job after the meeting is all said and done. So, all right, we have any visitors? We have one visitor.
That's
Your
my
chaperone.
my chauffeur.
Okay.
I said I would come.
Welcome, we're glad to have you here. I guess we'll move on to the SU committee reports and we'll start with the finance committee. And Russ, you want to?
We've got a handful of warrants. At 2 meetings ago, I think it was, there was discussion of whether warrants were distributed among the boards. And as far as I know, all of the boards have been apprised of that. I know that the WHS board did not want to see have the distribution of these. But I'm hoping that everybody is satisfied in terms of people are getting it if they want to get it. Now, we only have so much time. I'm trying to figure out a way to, if I'm allowed this time, to move the warrants, payrolls, and American Express wire transfers as listed on the agenda, if that's okay. Second, without reading it all.
Okay, there's been a motion to approve all the warrants listed from May 11th, 2016 through November 23rd, along with payrolls and the wire transfers. And a second. And Walter seconded. We have discussion? Any
Comment
questions?
that I would prefer we read that type of motion every time. We all have it written down, I don't really understand why we want to read, is there a legal reason for that? Or-
No. So I don't believe so.
Okay.
Any questions? All right, all those in favor of the warrants, payrolls, and wire transfers listed on tonight's agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions?
I abstain.
And your reason?
I decline to give a reason.
I have 0 words. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So that moves us on to unfinished business, Act 46. Well, we all know, don't know, Jill, do you want to give a quick update on, we have a meeting after this, in case anybody wants to spend a little more time here together. But do you want to give us a quick update on the last meeting, where we went over those last changes, or what was
Ron
done?
didn't like my update to the Brattleboro report. Maybe Ron should do it, he didn't like the way I said it. Which is the main change, was the makeup of the board, and after back and forth, and after Emily Long's participation at the meeting, we could do what we were wanting to do all along, so we did, which was to set it up so that each town votes for their own, and then the at-large are voted on by everyone. That was the major change, and then we put in a little bit of wording that Beth and I had noticed had gone out, and it was brought up at one of the Putney forums about making sure that there's significant input mandated in our articles of agreement if there were to be a school closure by the community where the school is. Those are the two
I
main.
think the other big one that's worth mentioning is that we voted to make it a unanimous vote
Oh,
that
yes.
would be required to amend or remove that Article 15, for school closure. So that was pretty.
No, that was leadership council, right?
Leadership.
Or the
Yeah.
leadership councils, yes.
And then everybody knows the outcome of the vote for Vernon. And I didn't know, Mike, if you and the Vernon reps had anything you wanted to share?
Well, actually, we'd like to make a motion, all right?
Okay.
We'd like to move the WSESU board vote to support Vernon's continued request to withdraw from BUHS number 6.
I'll second that motion.
And just to speak to it, as we know, the results of the vote, what they were, I have been in touch with the Secretary of State's office, haven't got a response yet. The question that we had last night at our board meeting is, because of the impact, the direct impact it has on Vernon, does Vernon have standing to request a revote or to request a recount? And it's never happened before, so they're gonna have to do some research on it.
I think since the vote in Dummerston that failed, the petition would really come from Dummerston.
Right, but that's what was unclear. And they weren't sure because this will be the first time it's ever happened, this type of vote, so we were looking for clarification. But certainly Vernon's desires and the impact of Vernon has not changed because of the vote. To move forward in the way we've outlined several times, we still need to be allowed to withdraw, even if the merger were to fail. We still need to withdraw from BUH number 6 to continue with school choice. But, you know, as we've,
Explain that a little bit more.
if, and it's questionable, there are attorneys on both sides, but if Donna Russo-Savage is correct with her interpretation that two districts cannot coexist when one is tuitioning and one is not, that would even be true if we were still part of the supervisory union. Because I did raise that question when she made that legal opinion, and she said, all these years that we've done this, that someone could have sued on the equity issue because she believes it's an equity issue. There are attorneys on the other side that don't agree with her opinion, but I think it's best for all of us if we don't get into a legal battle over that sort of thing, if we can do it in a more smooth fashion. So for Vernon, we need to be out of the BUHS number 6. That's kind of a tongue twister. We have to be removed from BUHS number 6 to maintain school choice. And also then we would petition the agency and the board to allow us to then contract to get the services we now have and keep a very similar relationship with the SU. Because people have asked that question. Vernon is not leaving because we're dissatisfied with the SU or our partners. We're leaving because we think in the best interest of our students in our town that maintenance of school choice is important. It's a historic importance to the town, and it's financially important to the town. So that's why we're making this motion and request.
And Mike, if I could follow up to when you had said at the Brattleboro public information meeting that if the vote failed, it would be discussed by your board, but that you thought it would be likely that Vernon would be filing a lawsuit. Did you discuss that, or is that going forward then?
Well, as I had explained, we've had attorneys contact us to be party to lawsuits throughout the state, and at this point in time, we've declined to do so. But we aren't going to have a knee-jerk reaction and do something rash. We're going to let the process unfold, And if there's a revote and we're successful with our desires, that's great, and then we would engage an attorney to negotiate with WSESU in a more positive fashion. If not, then we have to explore what our other options would be, because Vernon has no intention of volunteering to lose school choice. The lesson learned from Elmore was that if you continue down the path to merger and you get into a district, you're voluntarily giving up school choice. And there is no way that Vernon will voluntarily give up school choice. And the state board has said Elmore has no recourse because they voluntarily gave up school choice. So Vernon will not change our view as to how we're going to proceed. And I suppose if, as a last resort, if it required legal action, that's what you do, but you try to avoid that. The only winners in legal action, I think, are the attorneys that make a few bucks. You know, and it hurts relationships. People aren't, you become adversaries, and we don't want to do that.
Yes, Ruth?
My question is, if there should be a successful petition for a revote, do all the 4 towns have to vote or only Dummerston? Why? All 4 towns had to vote for it, and it was very clear that they all had to vote, and they all had to vote at the same time. So I don't see why you can have just one town re-voting.
That's the board from the Secretary of State.
Because it's not a commingled vote, each individual town, we could have had somebody in our town when we took our vote petition the town to revote. Guilford could have somebody file a petition to revote because it's done on a by-town basis. Whereas if the vote, as I said, if the votes have been commingled, then all of the towns would have to revote.
And if they'd been commingled, we'd be out.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
So I'm still confused as to, it's just a regular civics question. So when we don't like the result of a vote, who asked to have a revote? I mean, that's kind of what this sounds like is happening.
Your citizens can petition the board for
Yeah.
revote.
So Dummerston people have to ask,
And
Citizens.
Yeah.
Citizens of the town.
Of the town.
so if Dummerston citizens are not happy, a certain number gets together and says, we want to have this
They've
voted
got
on again.
5% of the voting, registered voters.
And your question that you were talking about earlier is whether, because it affects you, whether the town of Vernon can ask
Right.
a different town to revote.
If we could make that request, and that was I'm waiting for a decision from Secretary of State on that.
Which would presumably have a 5% or something, that same sort of petition.
I don't think so much the revote as a recount. We may have something with a recount, but I don't think the percentage was enough. It was 100 to 84, so I don't think the gap is enough to get a recount. So, but we have the question into the secretary, and any question that comes up, the board has done that. Whenever a question is raised, we'll give what we think is probably the answer, but we'll always verify with the secretary or somebody like that that would have the actual authority to make a decision on it. Like in legal issues, or school issues, I contact legislative counsel that may be working on a piece of legislation about a particular item, because they would have the most current information and they're most familiar with the law. I could probably tell you what I think Act 46 says, but everybody around the table could probably tell you what they think Act 46 says, and I bet you would have a lot of different opinions. So it's always good to go to a source that is recognized as an authority. And that's why the question was raised with the Secretary of State's office. Question came up, we're going to ask.
any further discussion?
One question I have is just, I mean, not on the merits of the vote, but you've asked this board to endorse the withdrawal. And I guess a couple of things, one is procedural in turn, because I'm just trying to process, what role the board has in endorsing or not, and also, without having advance notice, I mean, just thinking about it, it takes time to process, of whether that's.
I talked with Mike about this, and we felt it was a coming together of all the respective communities, signaling our collective support as representatives of our individual communities, supporting a neighbor in their quest to do what's right for their community.
So it's like, it's just sort of a spirit of
Yes.
the board. So it's not, obviously it's not binding, because we can't say, we can't change the vote.
Right.
It's just sort of
Yeah.
do we think the vote, do we like the way the vote came out? I mean, I'm just trying to
I'm
think
not
of
even-
what
I'm
that
not-
is.
It's
I
more,
mean,
it's a statement of sentiment, as
Yeah.
you said, that if we pass this, as a board, we're saying, yes, we do support the desires of Vernon to withdraw from the BUHS number 6. And that the rationale and reasoning is there, and you understand that. But it is not binding in that, if it were, we could have done this rather than having town votes. The BUHS number 6, when we sat down with them and said, will you let us out, and it was a unanimous vote that we would be allowed to remove ourselves from BUHS number 6, and we signed the agreement. That had some significance, but it was not the legal authority that dissolves the relationship. That has to come from the voters. But this is just a statement to reaffirm that as a body, we agree that that is a course of action that is, as we believe, in our best interest, and also in the best interest of the other parties, because we, as we've said before, we would like them, the other towns, to be able to move forward and do what they desire to do, and what they think is in the best interest of their town.
Yeah, I guess I'm confused, still a little befuddled, so that's often my state anyways. But is that, I mean, I'm a member of the BUHS board, and I voted to approve, the signing of the document and to permit that. But somehow, it's sort of, I'm not sure of the point. I mean, and while I may disagree with a town or town votes, I find it, I don't know, somehow at this moment I'm thinking, I like being respectful, but I want to be respectful to you, but I also want to be respectful to the town that voted no, and so I feel a little uncomfortable about re-voting. I mean, I supported your withdrawal, so again, it's not so much on the merits, but I don't know.
I view it as
There's some discomfort that
I view it as a coming together of our communities, in like I said, in support of a neighbor. We may not necessarily agree with, what they're doing, and we all may have different views on Act 46, but really this is about respecting another town's wishes. And were we in a similar situation, I think, we would want them to respect our wishes if we were doing it.
The other thing it allows for too is, if I were to request that Amy, as chair of this body, would write a letter of support, well, without this group saying that's okay, it's the same as my being chair of the Vernon board. I would not write an opinion of what the board thinks unless the board approved that. And I think here, Amy has a clear understanding of what we need to do and why we need to do it. And I would request that if there's going to be a revote, that this body would write a letter of support saying we support Vernon's efforts, and for whatever letter they want to put in the letter, whether you support our position on school choice, whatever you put into the letter, it would be that the body supports Vernon's action. And as it stands, 4 of our 5 towns have decided that. And what we're looking at really is 16 people are going to decide whether Vernon keeps school choice or alters our future as a town dramatically. And we find that a little disconcerting.
No, I mean, I agree with a lot of that. I mean, and I do support the sentiment of allowing Vernon to leave. It's having this board do that obviously causes me some discomfort. I mean, I think the vote didn't go, I mean, the vote in 4 towns went the way I would have wanted it to have gone, but, you know, that.
Well, I guess what we're asking is, do you still support that?
Yeah, I do, but that's me as an individual, rather than acting on behalf of the BOHS board or this board, and I'm not, I guess I'm just a little uncomfortable on the,
You know,
I guess to Russ's point,
Yeah.
I mean, with the Dummerston folks, would you be supporting, I mean, your town voted no. Do you
Our-
represent your town? I mean, I guess.
yes, I would vote in favor of supporting Vernon. There was a flurry of emails that went out with some significant misinformation the day of the vote by some very active members of our community, and I think skewed the vote away from Vernon, allowing them to leave with that misinformation, and that is why I feel pretty strongly that, you know, I would support them anyways, but I am, to be frank, a little PO'd.
I share Russ's concerns with the fact that this board, I mean, with all due respect, the voters have voted, so the voters have made a decision, and it may be premature for this body to even take a position when there is no petition that at least I'm aware of, and I don't know if anybody else is aware of at this point in time. So there's really no action to support at this point in time.
Then
So
what I would say in response to that is, you need to vote the way you think is correct. As I said, I don't go to other towns and tell them what they need to do. You need to do what you think is in the best interest for your town. And if you decide to vote that way, that's fine. But I think one of the things that needs to be considered is some of the emails I received after the vote from Dummerston residents were disturbing, because it made me feel that in this instance, Vernon was a pawn used by Dummerston. Because there were direct statements that this is great because now Vernon can vote no on the merger. So those citizens that campaigned for us not to be allowed out of BOHS number 6, their motivation was to put Vernon in a position where we would have to vote against the merger. The reality is, it puts us in a position that we're going to be adversaries with the rest of this group, because we have no intention of moving forward with a merger. If it would require that we get an injunction to stop the process, whatever the legal action would be to slow down or stop the process, Vernon's going to pursue that. It's totally unfair to the other towns that Vernon would need to do that, because those other 4 towns then can't pursue what they need to do. And when the Agency of Ed, Secretary Holcomb and Donna Russo-Savage said the best thing and the most effective thing for Vernon to do to resolve their issue of school choice is to become an alternative district and request that the other towns vote you out. That was the plan, and that's what we've pursued. That was the easiest and simplest. It's not the only. The only is recourse in courts. And as I said, that would do nothing but stall the process and cause harm to the other towns that we don't want to do. But we are adamant. We are not going to voluntarily give up school choice.
I mean, with all due respect, Mike, this board has already exerted some political will and leverage by publishing and paying for a mailer that went to all of the voters in each of the communities that we all serve. So to that, I will say, I don't know anything about emails one way or another. What I did receive was the voice of this board or this body publishing, a voter information card or information that was, in advance of a vote. That's all I received personally prior to the vote. So, voters are gonna receive whatever that they receive and make a decision, and I think we can agree that this is a complex process and an interesting time.
I'd just like to share too that the voters of Dummerston that reached out to me after the vote was made public were disgusted with our town. That they thought there was no reason why Dummerston should hold Vernon if in the high school district if it wanted to leave. And that's been the majority of sentiment that I have heard from all the Dummerston residents that I've come into contact with during this whole process. So, and I think, Michael, if you were privy to the email, and
As I said, Amy, I was not privy to the email,
I know.
so I don't know what it is. and I
May I
don't
finish
need to-
speaking, please?
Sure.
If you were privy to the email, you might have just a little different view. That's all I wanted to say.
And we do appreciate the flyer that went out, the little postcard that went out. I thought that was quite generous. We hadn't requested it. I thought that was a really nice thing for the other communities to do, to show support. And I think that's what we're asking now, is would you continue to show that support?
To that end, Mike, would it be possible to resend that postcard with perhaps an addendum? Additional information dispelling some of the words that I hear may have been in error that prompted the negative vote. That way, it's not necessarily having the entire SU board endorse something. It's simply the board endorsing an additional piece of information being sent to the voters of the Dummerston district in the event that a revote is granted.
Mary Alice? Or Deb, sorry?
Mary Alice wants to speak to you. I just wanted to thank the towns that voted for Vernon leaving. I do appreciate it.
Yeah.
This has been a hard process, so thank you for those who voted to allow us to leave. Like I say, I do appreciate it.
Yeah, unfortunately, Mike Farr left that out of the article. Mike, I want to thank him, but, and we do. We do appreciate the folks that have supported us. And it shows the relationship that we've had over the years, that we've always been supportive of each other as towns. And I would just like that to continue, and I want to, if at all possible, avoid any kind of confrontation with our neighbors. And to develop an adversarial relationship will do none of us any good. So, that's it.
Any further discussion?
I just want to say that I worked at the polls and I counted ballots in Dummerston. I think you can recount them several times and you won't get a different answer. But I will say that people came in, and of course poll workers can't say a great deal, but the question that people were asking was, if Vernon leaves, and so that they're not paying in to the district, the high school district, who's going to make up that difference? And that was what was unclear in several people's minds. They were afraid that if Dummerston left, that however much is it, say it's $600,000 or whatever, that Vernon pays in to the high school district, that the other 4 towns were gonna have to make up that money. And I did, perhaps I wasn't supposed to, but you can shoot me or put me in jail or whatever, but I did, one person came in and they were thoroughly confused, and I did speak up and say, well, Vernon is still gonna tuition students to.
Well, maybe to Mark's point, that an additional informational piece be distributed would be handy, because there's actually 2 considerations when you talk about Vernon payments. One is what we pay to the supervisory union for services received and being a member town, and that would be the part that we would want to negotiate so that we would continue getting services and there would be no loss of revenue to the SU. And the other is the question of tuitioning. And for the last 50 years, 75 to 80% of Vernon students have gone to Brattleboro. There's no reason to anticipate that that would change in any way. I think I would be more concerned if Vernon were not a tuitioning town and we said suddenly we want to be a choice town. And we've never had a track record. I would be nervous if I were the high school saying, well, how many kids are going to leave? But here we have a 50-year track record that shows 75 to 80% of Vernon students will attend Brattleboro. So, you know, as far as the finances, and Frank has addressed that on numerous occasions, there should be a negligible impact on the finance.
Well, I understand that, but a lot of
Well, maybe we have
people
to
don't.
maybe there has to be a better effort made to explain that.
Yeah, if I could, I mean, following on what Mark was saying too, that, you know, if Dummerston files and has a revote, then, because, you know, that argument, you know, was something I heard the day before as well, and, you know, timing is a lot of, you know, it has a lot to do with people's perceptions. So if there was a revote, which is not for us to decide, it's for the people at Dummerston to decide, then I'd have no problem about having representatives of the SU go and explain what the situation is. In fact, when we signed that document, we talked about tuitioning would cover expenses, would cover the bond issue. I mean, you know, everyone that, you know, that tuition's in, those are part of the expenses that people pay for. It's like, you know, if you own it, you pay the mortgage. If you rent, you pay the owner's mortgage, or a portion of the mortgage. So costs would be covered. And so that's the sort of, I mean, I have no problem at all with the SU going and informing and doing those sorts of things. But I guess my gut feeling is that it's, you know, if Dummerston decides not to re-vote, you know, I'm not sure what the point of us taking a vote to say, oh, but you should. I mean, I guess I'd prefer waiting and seeing what happens in Dummerston. Because I had a lot of the same feelings about what's going on and whether voters had accurate information or not. But I'm not sure that it's the will of the SU to do that. I mean, the other 4 towns already spoke through our votes. And, you know, it's Dummerston voted, and if they're going to re-vote, when do the electors meet in the national election? But anyways, but it's, so it's not at all in terms of not supporting Vernon, but again, I'm a little hesitant in voting for the SU to take a stand on it.
So I don't think the SU actually sent things out. That was the Act 46 study committee, because I wrote it.
Well, thank you. You did a nice job.
But I'm going to say it, I think we said it in the Act 46, and I'll say it again here. I'm a little uncomfortable doing that. We did that because we felt like some information had to come, but I feel like if it's Vernon asking, Vernon needs to explain more. And right now, I mean, what you're saying about going around and if there were a revote and having more information, actually, I thought this vote went exactly like I thought it would. Because we set up a vote by the timing of what you guys held for yours and by the time it came back down, at a time of year when nobody's thinking about it, after an election that was completely divisive and no one wants to think of politics anymore, with very little information on a very, very complex issue. And so I think there were more voters almost in Dummerston than there were in Brattleboro that came out, the population size differences. Mm-hmm. And because even people that knew about it were like, oh, I don't understand and I couldn't figure out what to vote. I think it behooves, if there is some sort of a revote, which I think comes back to Dummerston to decide, since they're the ones who said no, behooves Vernon to take it upon yourselves to describe it better and to do more proactive education of why you want to leave and how. Because the questions that Ruth is saying came up, those are the ones that came to me as well, not at the polls. But as a school board member, or just people in town, I don't get it. And it's too complex to get in a sentence thing. We did have those meetings. We hosted the meetings, and all of us in the Act 46 study committee, some people were out 4 nights in a row in December when, personally, I got a lot going on in December. It doesn't have anything to do with school board. So it was a terrible time to have that vote. If it does come up again, I hope Vernon can step forward and do more education in some ways.
Mark, did you want to say anything?
I was thinking, I agree with Russ, and I agree with Mike. This is a two-part thing. Before the board, we gathered here in this room tonight, could do anything, I think it's incumbent upon the voters in Dummerston to take what steps are necessary to ensure that there might be a revote. Without that, anything we do is going to be moot. But once that happens, and I suspect it just may, then Vernon needs to come up with an addendum to the informational letter that went out, fully explaining some of the concerns that caused the vote to turn out the way it did. And that way, we, 18 people, 20 people, are not trying to sway anybody's vote. The study committee's position is not to sway votes. We are simply to provide information.
And we did not take a position.
Right, and we did not take a position. Our positions were taken individually when we voted in our towns. But prior to that, we were simply supplying information. And I suspect that if the voters of Dummerston want to do a revote, that the study committee would sit down again and we will conduct another public information session. I don't think there's a number of the study committee members present. I don't think there'd be any objection to another cold night in probably January.
All right, then at this point, as I said, it's been Vernon's goal not to create problems within this supervisory union. It's obvious that there are differences of opinion in the group. So at this time, I think I would like, with your permission, to withdraw the motion. So if you'll allow that, I think board, this would be welcome.
Alice,
Okay.
you seconded it, if you're good with that? If that's your wishes, yes.
So we will, thank you for your consideration of the motion. We withdraw the motion. And on the same, at the same time, I would like to reiterate, though, that if there is not a revote in Dummerston, Vernon will not participate in the Act 46, and we will do all that we can to stop the merger. That would be court case, whatever, and it would be a ludicrous thing to do. A waste of time and a waste of money. Yes.
In other words, you don't want Vernon being named as a necessary school district within the merger.
Well, we certainly don't want to be advisable, but
Either.
we don't want to be, we don't want to
Necessary
be part,
doesn't have any.
we don't want to be party to it. And again, as we've said, we don't want to stop the other towns should do what they think is in their best interest. And that's what we ask with the vote. Please, would you, the other towns, allow us to do what we think is in the best interest of our town?
There is one question that has come up before the Vernon board several times, and I've had the question myself. The real easy way to solve this whole situation, we want to keep our school choice. The Act 46 committee can do just about everything they want, so why don't the rest of you give yourselves school choice, and then we could become part of this.
We
Why
tried
is-
that and the numbers don't work.
Why don't the numbers work?
Right?
You know, I think that might be a conversation for the next meeting. I mean,
Well, it
Food
also,
for thought, that we
Yeah.
get asked that all the time. Why don't they just give school choice to everybody?
well, it also goes to the point that I made earlier about having the history of, Vernon has 50-year history of 75–80% going to Brattleboro.
65.
If you say all of a sudden everybody's got choice,
Right.
the impact, you have no idea what the impact of the school is going to be. It could be catastrophic, it could be beneficial, who knows? But certainly, it's a very unknown quantity.
So, you talked about the 50-year history with, let's say, 75 to 80% of the students. So we did a calculation in thinking about the small schools, or even Brattleboro town, If you lose 20% of your student population, that's a huge issue. And for some of the small schools, it would close those schools. Again, it doesn't affect you because you've had that 50-year history.
Right.
That's been the staffing related to the students that you have. That would be a hardship for many of the schools.
Well, that's the uniqueness of Vernon's situation. When we talked to Hope and Donna Savage, they understood, yeah, you guys have this very unique situation. We're the only school in the state that has school choice and is a member of a district.
So to answer your question, Deb, you heard the answer. I mean, we have considered it, and that was the answer. And then we also considered as a study committee trying to, as you well know, trying to leave Vernon in until it became clear from the state that that was not allowed with the school choice.
Right.
And we've tried even to grandfather, and we tried with some pretty generous terms of grandfathering, but that didn't appease what you folks wanted either. So
Well,
it's not a matter of the study committee not trying to listen to Vernon.
And the reality is with the grandfathering, several attorneys said, you cannot grandfather something that's unconstitutional. So if it's held to be unconstitutional, you can't say, okay, we'll let you do it for 20 years. No, you can't, either you can or you can't do it. And again, that would be a court case as to whether Donna was right or not. So, anyway, I think, thank you for allowing us to withdraw the motion, and why don't we let the meeting move forward, because this is taking a good bit of time.
So, thank you, everybody.
Just one word, bit of advice. If we are going to have a revote in Dummerston, which I imagine we will, there needs to be somebody there outside the voting area to explain to these people who have lived under a rock somewhere and don't understand what's going on, to explain to them what the whole thing is about.
That's illegal.
But they can't, they can't be in, they'd have to
They
stand
can't be in, but they can
Burn
stand
sounds awful.
outside.
That sounds chilly.
Well, it could be chilly.
You have to be
In
along.
many ways.
There's
I've
a
learned
foot,
that a long
and it's like
time.
500 feet or something. You gotta be along, but you can't do that big.
Well, they do it all the time at town meeting.
Well, each town though sets up their own regulations. Some you can't be on town property. Vernon just changed that. It used to be you could stand outside the door of the polls, but now you cannot stand on town property. Each poll, each person in charge of the poll sets those rules as to what you can do and can't do.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. So we will go on to talk about the main reason why we're here, which is the FY18 budget. And for that, I will defer to Russ Janis, who is our SU Finance Committee Chair.
Okay, I will, during the time, I was gonna go through the 71-page document line by line, but, no, I'm gonna be really quick about this and turn it over to Frank to go through.
Thank you, Russ.
And part of it during we had a meeting just before this one, and, well, it was at that time, it was 3 hours ago, but now it's probably about 5 or 6 hours ago that some of the numbers started coming from the state in terms of initial equalized pupil counts and those sorts of things. So Frank pulled together something that was emailed this afternoon, I think, with some revenue figures. In general, the main change, if you look at the one that does not say revenue, so it's the expense one, it's a little bit thicker with a date of 12/14 on it. The main change that you'll see is under special ed, is over the left, it's line 0211, the special ed expenditures, and that looks like it has gone up $1.5 million or so. But the large part is, the principal part of that is that because of state rules, the para-educators who work in special ed are now offered each of the town board's budget and is consolidated into the SU budget. So even though that number looks like a big jump, And so the bottom line total expenditures from the current year's budget to next year's budget is going up $1.3 million, which this page doesn't have a percentage, but that's, I don't know, 5, 6, 7%, something like that. The bulk of that is from the switch of the paralegals. Just as about 3 years ago, it was the teachers made that switch. So it gives some flexibility, not just financially, but in terms of making them SU employees, switching among the schools. And it's moving in a spirit, the background of Act 46. I don't mean to say anything in terms of that, but I think, you know, the SU board, we realize that kids are kids and they're ours. However, we have the local governance is a different thing, but we have, so by state mandate, more is coming to the SU in general. And then another change that we are proposing is in terms of the allocation of to the towns, and that will show up in the revenue sheet, revenue bundle that does say at the top, 12, 15, 16 with revenue detail. And if I'm right, I think it's on page 10 of that, where the assessments go, or the net cost after state reimbursement go to the various towns. And there was a proposed change in the way we're allocating expenses. In part, besides the employees coming to the SU, the revenues used to come for special ed to each of the towns, and then the SU billed that out, and so that was a revenue and an expense at each of the towns. Now it's there, and so the new allocation method, the old allocation method, some things like tuitioning, I think, went directly to the towns. Others were principally some sort of balance of census and IEP numbers. After a fair amount of discussion, what we thought in terms of sort of spreading risks and the ups and downs, because I mean, I was on the Brattleboro Town School Board for over 8 years, and the smaller towns have this more, where the SU, the special ed budgets can be very volatile depending on who's moving in, who's moving out from town to town, or moving in or moving out of the district in general. And so that means that the tax rates and tax burdens among the town are very volatile. So what we decided was to have a, I don't know what page that one was on, but it was a, instead of looking at IEPs and general census, is just basing it on general census data and looking at a 2-year average, so that at least the total number of students, if there's a blip, that smooths out. And that way, looking forward, those financial risks, which means dealing with educating our kids as they need to be educated, is spread among the whole supervisory union, rather than just on the town where things happen to happen. And particularly, it makes some sense to make that move, given that the employees for special ed are now all SU employees. So, I'll let Frank go through the specifics, and he can respond to whatever questions you have. But you'll see that some towns, in terms of their expenses, are going up more because of again, move-ins and those sorts of things. But that is not necessarily reflected in what the town allocation is, because again, we're just spreading it out equally among the towns based on the number of kids we have in the state, whether they have extra expenses or not. So spreading that risk out. That's something that I've been interested in for a long time. But anyways, and then the bottom line is I'll let Frank go through it. The bottom line, for instance, special ed, even after all the switching around, Frank has gone through and put it at sort of as if everything were SU and so reallocating it hypothetically to the SU, that, did the special ed go down? I mean, it was just about level, it went down by
Total spending is down.
like a couple $100,000 or something like that. So we've been keeping expenses down, and now we're spreading it among everyone, rather than having one town have a blip up or down and those sorts of things. So I'll turn it over to Frank, unless there are other general questions to go through some specifics.
Okay, quick review, and Shelley, or Marissa, did you have a data sheet that? So a data sheet on much of what Russ was describing around special education will be coming around, and we'll speak to that briefly. As we go into our local budgeting at each district level, let me just highlight a couple of things that Russ has said. I think he gave you a good overview, so I won't add too much. But on the document that has revenue in the upper right corner, the first page is the assessments that go into the local budgets. So this would be the administrative assessment and the supportive instruction, curriculum development, and the English language learner section of our budget. You see on that first block of data on page 1, line 9 on the right-hand side.
So by page 1, you don't need the cover sheet.
The one that says page 1 on it?
Yeah, so it's going to the spreadsheet.
And then you see on the very far right, we have a reference numbers, line 9. So the administrative assessments are changed. The change is 1.4%. And as Russ indicated, each district is assessed proportionally based on enrollment. So you see, in total, the change is 1.4%. And there's not a lot of variation from one town to another. But there is some, and that's based on the change in enrollment. By the way, does anyone else need a copy of the document?
Yes, we didn't get anything.
It's on the web.
Sorry about that.
Okay, we have what we need.
You got it? Okay.
Thank you.
So as far as the 2300 section of your local budgets, those would be the assumptions that if this budget gets approved tonight, we would be seeing those in your local budget. The other section that Russ highlighted was the special education area. So on page 2 of that same data set, we have the special ed assessments. So line 57 on page 2. So line 57 on the far right. Did you need another copy, Russ?
No, I think.
You've got one? Okay. You see assessments, again, that are going into the local budgets, down 4.6 million. So this year, the assessments are 8,900,000. Next year, it will be 4,251,000, again, if we approve this budget. So the reason why it's down so substantially is because of the next data set that you see there, line 59, 60, 61, 6.1 million is estimated to be coming to the SU in special education revenues. That previously, about 5.9 million is the equivalent amount that was budgeted this year, is in the local budgets. To understand the impact of that, when we're all done in terms of total spending and then total assessments to pay for the spending, if we look at page 9 in this data set, page 9, just a few lines above the very bottom of the sheet there, that's the total spending for both the local districts and the supervisory union for special education, and this would be the school-aged group. So again, Russ was highlighting the fact that we're relatively flat in spending. Fiscal year 15 budget, 11,071,000, you see that on the first column. Fiscal year 16 was 10,780,000. You've heard Ron mention that a number of times. Fiscal year 17, 11,245,000, that's our current year. And the proposed budget is 11,212,000, it's down 33,000. So that's why overall, we're seeing our special ed assessments down. If you take all of the stuff that Russ described and then what I just pointed out to you, in total, the system is spending less on special education. And we've spent a fair amount of time being assured that these are good assumptions based on the student needs. So that's obviously the majority of the budget, the total budget that we would ask a motion for, 18,768,135 on the first page. Of that, 11,212,000 is special ed school age, and then you see another 733,000 is special ed, which is referred to as essential early ed. It's the preschool age. So, nearly 12 million in total out of the 18.7. The other pieces that you may hear us report on, you certainly see the effects of the programs in your schools. Russ mentioned down toward the bottom of the first page, the summary page, 2,130,000 in our grant programs. Single largest grant there is the Title I. It's the interventions for math and literacy. We have our program directors here, Paul Smith, Lyle, Holiday, and you've heard, I'm sure, before the really remarkable results that we see in our schools, particularly with high poverty, and really excellent student outcomes. Food service, also part of the SU budget as part of Act 156. And that is substantially level funded, but we also have the assumptions for the local subsidies that each district would see in their budgets. And there's been no dramatic change in those subsidies. The Putney program looks a little different than the other programs just because it is a self-operated as opposed to contracted food service, but it essentially runs the same in that we buy food and pay for services, and then we have a combination of federal reimbursements and some sales. So in general, the impact on the local budgets is on the assessment level for administrative and instructional services, up 1.4%. The special education overall down from the current year. And the rest of those programs are essentially self-funded, but the SU does need board approval through the budget process to implement programs.
I have a question. And I think you went over this in the finance committee, but if you could again for the rest of us. On page 3 of the expenditure sheet, the step services shows Guilford and Vernon combined. Could you talk about that a little bit?
I could, yes. So the special education services starts on page 2, and it's identified, page 2, district-wide services, which is all services consumed by all schools, and then as we go to page 3, we start getting to site-specific services. And what we're looking at is a relatively new program. You see on page 3, there's a blank in the first 2 columns because it wasn't active, so these are new programs. And we have a couple of folks that are far better position to explain the STEP program at the Brattleboro Town, and then I think you were more focused on the 07 group there, the
Yep.
Guilford Vernon. Okay, so Marisa, if you could help us understand on page 3, the 405,000, up 155,000 is a significant increase in that program. What are we?
Yeah, so, the STEP service requires a certain amount of employees to do that. We have an intensive case manager, behavior analyst, and STEP paras. And Vernon and Guilford have wanted this program to be part of what their services are, so we have added that into the budget for this year, for the upcoming year. And so that increases the staff that we were looking to hire.
So are we sharing staff, or do we each have our own program with our own staffing?
We were not looking at sharing staff, we were looking at individual staff, but we separated Brattleboro Town was its own entity, and then the STEP service for the outlying schools.
So if Putney implemented one as well, it would show Guilford, Putney, and Vernon?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is the 20-page summary report, but there's a 70-page detail report, and in the detail report that the finance committee reviewed, you do see the separation between the schools.
And does that, sorry, Paul, does that figure include the staffing that we talked about in Guilford in the presentation that we went over, exact staffing level?
Yes.
Or- Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Other questions?
No additional questions? So we would need a motion for the 18,768,135.
Right.
Approve it.
So I would move, I don't have the language in front of me, that the supervisory union approve budget expenditures of $18,768,135 for fiscal year 18, as shown on the documentation presented tonight.
I'll second that.
Frank, in our meeting, which unfortunately we just had while you were in here, so we couldn't ask you, so I have to ask you now. David Scholes was concerned that if we approve this tonight, because there's some questions of how we suddenly decreased by so many students in Brattleboro. And Ron indicated that you've been going back and forth, and I suppose we don't want to dive into this for very long, but two-part question, whether it's some understanding of why those numbers, and some input from you, because we couldn't hear earlier, why those numbers are so dramatically different. And then the second half is David's concern of, are those numbers solid enough for us as a Brattleboro Town School Board to feel that we can approve a supervisory union budget that would then therefore have dramatic impacts based on those numbers? Does that make sense?
It does, yeah, and so as we look at this budget, you see that special ed is not going to be a significant impact. I mean, actually, it's going to be somewhat of a significant decrease, so for Brattleboro Town. So you see that in this documentation when you look at page yeah, page 10, and actually,
I'm sorry, 10.
yeah,
Down 20,000?
so page 10, yeah, and actually, I was thinking Brattleboro Union, but on 1.3 million, $20,000 change is not going to be a significant impact, and given that we will be weighted, all of the districts, in Brattleboro Town being the largest of the Brattleboro Union High School, you will be weighted with the $215,000 decrease that you see there in the Brattleboro Union system. Overall, this budget you see as a net impact of $156,000 lower on the town school budgets for special ed. On the administrative side, the only piece of the 18 million that Russ has moved is that first line, and that line for administrative services, the 2 million, the assessment is on page 1 of the detail, 2,322,238. That's that 1.4% change. So again, not going to be a cost driver in the town school budget.
No matter what the numbers are.
Right, yeah.
Thank you.
Any additional questions, discussion?
I think this comes up every year. And I'm gonna bring it up again. There doesn't seem to be any time between the time that the finance committee finally signs off on this and the whole SU board. We don't have any time to look at this thing between. You know, we're given it tonight and 10 minutes later, let's vote on it. Some of us would like more time to digest this bunch of numbers.
Is it necessary to vote tonight, right now?
I don't think it's critical. It's helpful for the local districts. The high school does vote on, is it Monday, I believe? The high school votes on Monday, so it's certainly helpful to have a vote before the school districts, essentially approve and begin publishing numbers. That is a very useful for planning, but that would be the main reason for doing it.
Each of the boards have representatives on the SU Finance Committee going through it, and some of the numbers have come in fairly late, but that doesn't answer your question about seeing this at this stage. Trying to think of, and part of it, because you're on my board, is as I'm thinking back, and I'm trying to think of it, I don't inform, I go over generally what we've done, but we haven't gone over specific numbers as they're being developed. Though I'm just trying, yeah.
My point is, I'm being asked to vote on something that I haven't had a chance to
Right.
digest.
Although I think you were at our last finance meeting.
Yes.
And this whole document is substantially.
I think you personally have seen these things, but you're speaking for others as well. But,
Yeah,
So the finance committee has met, we have that annual calendar, we met on November 9th, we met on November 16th, we met on November 30th. We also met on December 8th, and we met this evening. So all of those opportunities are available for any board member to join the deliberation. And unfortunately, because much of the data is dependent on what we get from the state, it's difficult to, unless we do these general estimates, it's difficult to do them. Just today, we got this special education, nearly 2 million in assumptions around revenue.
Yeah, and a lot of it is, for instance, the WHS board, where we're asked to approve our budget, or will that be that'll be the second meeting or the first meeting? It'll be the second meeting approving it, and then with notices, I think it's Valentine's Day when our meeting is, and so it's backed up to, just what time we have, because it feels like the middle of January.
I guess I'm always surprised that it comes so quick, because at the high school board, it seems like we look at it one meeting, and the next meeting, we look at it again, and we approve it, and
Well, I think in part there are different sorts of requirements. I mean, I know, as a school board member and members of the public, you know, and you wanna say, well, we discussed it at open meetings, and you wanna say, why aren't you there? Because people have other things to do. The people we're answering to are people on the boards who are sort of in the profession and sort of know what's going on. And the vote that we take here, that's the vote. The votes, we have the two informational meetings to inform the general public who aren't school board members and don't spend a good portion of their life looking at budgets and worrying about those things. So I think a difference of what takes place at the 6 boards and what takes place here is our constituency, in some sense, sort of in a democratic representative way, are the representatives themselves. And so that, you say this question has come up every year, well, the answer, it's a snarky answer, but, well, you could come to the meetings and you can ask and you can see these things, the public documents are there, and you sort of know the way the system works. And so it's a little bit different when you're dealing with the general public who don't do this stuff, at least twice a month for regular meetings, and who knows how many other meetings for that. So I think that's a big reason why it goes much more quickly here and there's less time, is because you should know better. No, but it's, I think, because I'm sorting it through my mind, as I'm speaking here, but I think that explains a lot of the differences in terms of who are informing and do they know what the system is. And all the boards have, at least on our agenda, there's, a report from the finance committee. So I know we did this, we did that. I haven't come in and shown these, but I haven't shown the warrants, and when I asked at our last meeting, there was not a mad rush to say, yes, send us more warrants. So I think that's the way it's gone, and that maybe in the future, just the way that you had asked before, to make sure that people got the warrants, that if the individual boards in the future want to see drafts, sent by PDF, on emails, we could do that. But time is sort of short now, and I know that Jill has other things to do in December, at least that's what she said, I don't know. But,
I'm doing some of them.
yeah, there. So I don't know, I'd still urge a vote tonight, and then to take that action in the future. To make sure that these things are distributed. So at the next meeting, or when the next budget sessions roll around in the next October, wherever they are, is that the boards that want to have all of the drafts circulated, they're public documents.
Thank you.
Yes, Sandra.
I'd just like to echo what Ruth said. And Frank has so much information and he's so good at it, but I can't keep up. And maybe the rest of you can follow it and understand everything quickly, but I have to say I'm having a hard time following all the different things he's explaining. And it's like an overload of information, and I'm just trying to keep up with where he is and what it means. And it's very hard to come up with questions. It's a lot to try to digest all in one load, so it sounds good, but I really don't feel like I'm being competent.
Well, I don't
being a
think,
responsible voter.
I think regardless of whether you could have attended the meetings or what you should know or what we should know, we could talk about that all night. The bottom line is, nobody should vote if they don't feel comfortable with the numbers that are in front of them. I guess that's the bottom line. If you're not comfortable, Sandra, then don't vote to approve it tonight. And I think that should go for anybody here. I don't think you should feel pressured into doing it just because some of us feel ready and some of us don't.
Each of the reps going through the budgets as we've gone along, besides looking at the overall thing, do look at the impact on their own town and ask specific questions. tonight, you know, at our session here, we looked at, you know, questions came up on individual towns and at other meetings too, as we goes stage by stage, and Ruth went to more of the meetings than I did this year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm comfortable with voting on it. I mean, I have been to the meetings, I know what's going on, but I just did want
Oh, no,
to
it's
get
a
my
valid
question
point.
in.
Oh, no, it's
Particularly since now we have a camera and the general public can now hear the
I
discussion.
should have worn a blue shirt, isn't it?
Any further discussion? So we have a motion that was made by Russ and seconded by Mark to approve the FY 18 budget expenditures of $18,768,135, wait, $18,768,135. There we go. Are we ready to vote? Yes, okay. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions?
Nay.
I'll abstain.
Okay, anyone else? Thank you. What else do we have here? Oh, yes. Sure.
So we have an item here listed under as executive committee discussion. I know in the last couple of meetings, the last meeting, the board, the supervisory union board was asked to authorize the finance committee, in a sense, to be the executive committee for a particular action. And as I've said, I think at that meeting and the meeting before, the finance committee historically has served as an executive committee. Finance, compensation, evaluation, and goal setting. And so when we had that discussion last meeting, authorizing the finance committee to do this work on behalf of the SU board, I think there was some discussion that, well, we should put this on an agenda and have discussion about formalizing this as an executive committee. So that's why it's on here, and we would have some discussion about this.
And we have a list of what this committee, executive committee would be responsible for. Can we make it clear?
I mean, we need to develop that list.
I think then the questions that we had would be eliminated, because we would already know this is an executive committee, and it's made up of the finance committee who are elected. So when we're electing at our board levels, we would be electing, perhaps, I don't know what you call it, still a finance committee, but maybe you call it the executive finance committee or something. And we know that these are the issues that come before that board. And perhaps even the issue has a broad statement of, and any other issues that need to be determined or something. But then we would all know when we're voting on that person, and we would not have these open-ended discussions.
Walter?
Is there a formal description of the function of the committee?
No.
So maybe just developing that
I think
and
that would help.
having this board approve it?
Some boards have bylaws with
Right.
kind of a historical list of activities. We don't have that.
You might want to consider having a separate executive committee. Instead of having one committee do everything. I mean, it wouldn't, probably would not be a terribly active committee. Sort of like the grand jurors.
So I have a motion even, I'm ready. If I make a motion that we that we need this decision and formulate what this committee would do, and that we ask the finance committee to do that. Because they're just done with their work otherwise. So there's something new,
So you're making the motion to ask the finance committee
to come up with a list of
description
duties.
of what they do. Okay.
Come up with a job
Develop their own
description?
job description.
Well, for the executive committee and finance committee, for what
Okay.
Ron's been kind of using them as and thinking what they are.
So is that giving acceptance to the fact that the finance committee will be the executive committee?
No, it's just that you guys get to talk about it.
We get the time. Thank you.
In the interest of time,
Yes.
I will second that motion.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions?
oh, our first unanimous for the evening.
Thank you. Do we have any other business that we'd like to discuss?
Floating a shipwreck.
All right, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn if anyone's so
I
inclined.
move we adjourn.
All right, go second?
Second.
With that, thank you. All those in favor? Any nays or abstentions? Second.
I-